This was not just a tragedy. It was a crime.
Okay, here we go.
Look at her, she's hurt! She's hurt!
White lives matter! White lives matter! I can't breathe!
We are all brothers and sisters of Christ.
When he took his last breath, the rest of us will now be able to breathe.
Now!
It needs to turn into concrete change.
What do we want? Conviction! What do we want? Now!
Either the law will work or it won't work. And we are fighting wickedness.
Not just for George Floyd, but for all the Black lives.
Our conversation that must continue. And thank you for joining us on NBC6 Voices on our Facebook and our YouTube pages. I'm Jawan Strader. Well, today's conversation is all about I can't breathe. What's next? The all-important question. This is an interactive discussion out there for all of you. So we are asking you to take part in this all-important discussion. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have something that you want to say from the bottom of your heart, feel free to go online. You see right there in the side of the boxes right there, you can go ahead and add a question. Let us know what you're feeling, what you're thinking. Let us know if you have any questions for our panelists. But we want to make sure that this is an interactive discussion and we get you involved in this discussion. We're also going to provide some great resources out there for many of you who want to channel your anger and frustration, things that you can do. Also, legal avenues for places you can go if you need legal help as well. So without further ado, let's welcome our panelists to the show. We have a great panel. I like to say that they are the cream of the crop. We are waiting for one more to join in. We believe the time difference may have thrown them off a bit. So we're going to get to him in a moment, but please welcome, and you may recognize some of them, Tifanny Burks. She is Black Lives Matter Alliance of Broward. You've seen her on the screen. She's doing her thing. She's been adding foot to pavement. She has been very active in this movement. Also, my man, Philip Agnew, co-founder of the Dream Defenders. He's also worked with the Bernie Sanders campaign. He's done so much. This is a man who is very vocal, who has been for years. He is a young leader in our community. Also, our civil rights attorney, Justin Moore, he will be joining us here in just a moment, like I just said. But please welcome attorney and assistant director of the Miami Civilian Investigative Panel, Rodney Jacobs Jr., who is also very vocal and has been for a number of years in making sure that there is fair treatment, especially when it comes to the police department in the city of Miami. And of course, we're going to get to that discussion because there are calls now for the county to have the same thing. So, Rodney, we're going to get to that in just a moment, but please welcome our panelists. We have a great panel here, but let's recap. Let's recap a little bit of what has happened this past week since our last discussion, Breathing While Black. First and foremost, let's say their names. George Floyd. Let's say their names. Breonna Taylor. Let's say their names in Ahmaud Arbery, first and foremost. And our hearts going out to the Floyd family who was just laid to rest yesterday. All right, well, all four Minneapolis police officers have now been charged. And as many of you know out there, charges have been upgraded for Derek Chauvin to second-degree murder. And many people are calling for first-degree murder charges for him. So we're going to have to see how this all plays out. And also, a number of police departments across the country have banned the use of the knee on the neck restraints that took the life of George Floyd. But anyway, let's get to the discussion here with our great group of panelists. And then, of course, we're going to try to bring in civil rights attorney Justin Moore. So let's start off. Let's start off here with something that has been in the news lately. And Tifanny, I want you to talk about this and lead this off. Let's talk about defunding the police department, because it seems like there's some sort of confusion here and it's being twisted into something else. So I want to hear from you. Is that what's next here? And how do you see that defunding the police department?
Yeah, that is what's next. That's what's moving on the ground right now. We are working to defund the police locally in Broward County. And this is following the same trends that are happening on the ground in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered and killed. We see that the Minneapolis City Council just voted to disband their police department and actually move to community-led efforts that actually uplift and keep our communities safe, right? And so we're following that same trend, as well as in Los Angeles. There has been moves to actually defund the police in the amount of $150 million. And so we see a lot of that same work here locally. That was one of our main demands when we had our large action on Sunday, May 31st, where we had 3,000 people gather in downtown Fort Lauderdale. And we see that it's so necessary, because even after our peaceful protests end, you see these viral stories where a Fort Lauderdale Police Department officer mushed a young Black girl's head into the ground after she was trying to get safely home to her car. And then shortly after that, another FLPD officer shoots a peaceful protester in the head. So we know that in order to move to true safety measures, we have to defund the police, and we're starting it here locally. Mm-hmm.
And Tifanny, I got to ask you, what does that look like? What does defunding the police look like? Because some are saying, so you mean to tell me there are not going to be any more police officers? That's what some are saying. And it's there's not going to be any law enforcement. So yeah. Are you saying there's not going to be any law enforcement? Or are you just saying that, no, you want to redirect funds? You want to go into the community, those funds that were taken out of those communities that have been for years?
Yeah, and it's both. When people say that, start getting a little bit riled up, like, what do you mean? But it's actually both. We want those resources to be divested from the police department and actually reallocated to community-led efforts. So we want to see more things like what's happening in Oregon, where they actually, when you're calling the police and somebody's having a mental health emergency, that call is automatically rerouted to a community-led organization that is filled with trained, culturally competent mental health professionals. We want to see more things like that happen locally. We don't want police officers to go into scenes where they have no training, they escalate, and they mostly shoot people when they're having a mental health emergency. We've seen that happen to Linda Sue Davis here locally in Broward County. We've seen that happen to Marlon Woodstock. There's so many local names where we have seen this happen, where police officers are not trained, they're not equipped, and then oftentimes police interactions lead to death with civilians who are having mental health emergencies. So when we say defund the police, we absolutely mean that we're trying to get to a $0 budget within policing, and starting out slowly. With Fort Lauderdale Police Department, we want to actually defund them by $10 million on the next commission meeting on Tuesday, June 16th. And we already had several dozen people email our commissioner, our Fort Lauderdale commissioners, to make sure that this is on the agenda, that they vote on it, they move at rapid speed in places like they have already in Minneapolis, in Los Angeles. We want that same energy here locally. We want people not to wait. And we have people who are ready to be mobilized and are already making moves. They already called their commissioners. They're already sending out emails. And that's how we're continuing this work. We have over now, I want to say 1,800 people who have signed up, who attend our action, and we already have them moving in their next steps.
And I see Philip shaking his head in agreement with you. And we're going to, matter of fact, we're going to bring in civil rights attorney Justin Moore into this conversation as well. So Justin, we're going to get to you in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. So Philip, I see you shaking your head, nodding in agreement. I want to hear from you on this.
Well, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we've been using the police as a hammer for all manner of things in our communities. When I was shaking my head because Tifanny laid out the case loud and clear. Safety in a community, we have been using the police as the only means of bringing safety to a community, knowing that they do not. The police brutalize us in almost every way in an interaction with a Black person. But let me say this, a safe community has food, has educational opportunities, has jobs, has shelter, has healthcare, right? That is how you build safety into a community. And we have already proven, actually, that we can be safe, we can convene, we can live, we can handle conflict without the police. If you've been to any of the protests that have happened, if you've been to any Black community, whether it be a protest or a picnic, things don't really start happening until the police get there. I've never felt safe. And we had a conversation about this many years ago, Jawan. I've never felt safe in the presence of a police officer. And so when you have a situation as Tifanny is laying out and millions of people are laying out around the country, where a sizable part of the population does not feel safe with the entity that is supposed to be providing safety, then we have a public health crisis in this country, and it must be remedied. We must move that money from an institution that is woefully insufficient of providing safety into things that are proven. Empirical evidence has proven that when you provide the basic things that people need, that children need, that young people need, that fathers, that mothers, that couples need, then that community has the safety. Other people get safety, Jawan. They get safety over in Fisher Island. They get safety in Miami Beach. We get policing.
Okay, so I have to ask you this question because it just popped up on the screen, Philip. And so someone just said, so if someone breaks into your home or someone breaks into your car, so what? Here it is right here. If someone breaks into your home, will there be help from the police? Well, who are you going to call if someone does that?
Well, let's be clear. When somebody breaks into a Black person's home, the police not coming very quickly. So even if Bridget Burnap, even in the current conditions where police are supposed to be there to help, we have dozens of stories, hundreds of stories of Black people calling the police for help. Being burglarized, being attacked, being domestically abused, having a crisis, and the police are still going there with intent to kill. And so what we're saying is we think there's a better way, and there's ample evidence that the police are not the solution to the issues in our communities. And we need to have a conversation about what safety looks like and where police potentially could, maybe, possibly fit into that equation.
Okay, so Rodney, I have to bring you into this conversation. This is something you deal with, and I see you shaking your head as well, being with the Civilian Investigative Panel. So what do you think about that? And what do you think about defunding the police? And do they make some good points here?
Listen, I think Tifanny and Philip make excellent points. I try to look at everything from an administrative standpoint, since I am an executive for civilian oversight. But there's a couple things to keep in mind. I'm for reappropriation of funding from police departments. I mean, oftentimes we hear that the police departments are overfunded to begin with. We have people that are working in police departments that cost up to $100,000 a year to train a police officer. So when people look at Black and brown communities and we say, hey, we need more resources, we need more funding for our schools, we need better affordable housing, and then the legislature or your city governments, they're the first ones to say, well, we don't have enough money for all that. Well, you have enough money for it. You're putting resources into the Black community. It's just not resources into things that we need. So it makes ample sense to take money from the police department to help bolster those things, because we know that if crime is really the issue, quote unquote, that more policing doesn't solve that crime, or else that would have been proven over the last 50 years or so. What helps diminish those things is better quality of life, better education, better ways to feed your family. So we have to take those monetary resources from the police department and put it into the community. And I would submit to you all that people within the police department believe that same thing too. I can't tell you how many times I've met with executives that say, Rodney, we can't police away all of our problems, or they'll say training won't solve all of our police problems. Well, you know what? You're right. Policing won't solve all of our problems. And so because of that, we have to put more money into social services, public health situations to help city resiliency. And that's the way you build better cities and communities. Now, the issue that I have with disbanding the police department is not necessarily hard and fast or straight to the point. We see that in Minneapolis, they did disband their police department, but they're more than likely they're going to do something similar to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri after the Michael Brown shooting, and in New Jersey, and that they hired the county police to kind of patrol their cities. And usually what that looks like for Black and brown bodies is less accountability and less control. You have more county police officers in your community that are not necessarily accountable to those community members. They live far out, separate and apart from those locations. So it adds a bit more turmoil to those locations. In fact, I would submit that, even after the Michael Brown shooting, a lot of police officers that were wreaking havoc on the city of Ferguson weren't even city of Ferguson police officers. They were from the outside municipalities that they had to contract and bring them in. Right. And those city elected leaders didn't have control over them. And then, so the only other viable options that if we're not going to do county contracting is what? Either you privatize policing, and usually privatization of anything within the Black community is bad, from privatized schools to privatized prisons. Usually we get the short end of the stick. And then the last thing is, what? Hire mercenaries, Pinkertons in Blackwater? No, obviously those aren't necessarily good alternatives to a solution. So we have to be careful when we say, hey, let's disband the police department. Yeah, that may sound good. It may be what it needs to be. As Tifanny says, hey, we need to look at how safety looks like, how we can, have a shift towards that over a course of time. That is the real method, because policing in America, the way policing is done here is not the way it's done in other places around the world. So we could definitely change those things, but it definitely can't be done all at once, because I think if that were to happen quickly, Black people will be left holding the bag in worse ways than we are right now.
I can agree with that as well, Rodney. And I want to get to Justin more, because Justin represents Diamond Loving, a beautiful young Black woman here in Miami that was taken down in a rough arrest. And basically it was because of it was almost like they didn't understand where she was coming from type thing. And does there need to be more sensitivity training? Are we tired of sensitivity training when it comes to law enforcement? So, Justin, I want to ask you that, because, okay, we're talking about defunding, but let's talk about some other things that need to be done as well, because we're talking about what's next here. And with your client, and also someone else that you're representing there in Texas, where you see one of your clients pulled over and his grandmother collapsed. I mean, it was just incredible video that you posted on your Instagram page. So I'm interested in hearing from you on this.
Yeah, I think the conversation that's being had around the country is really interesting. And for one, I am for this defunding the police. I think it's something that needs to occur. Just from the standpoint, if you look at Diamond's case and if you look at Ty Anders' case, the nature of policing is one in which it's not efficient nor effective. And I think it's because the nature suggests that we're surveilling Black people. And that's why there's over-policing in Black communities. That's why there's over-aggression in Black communities, because they're actively looking for crimes when crimes might not be apparent, as opposed to how they actually police and respond to, I would say, issues in more affluent communities. And by way of an example, I don't live in Miami, but I'm in Miami a lot. When I go to Brickell, I don't see a lot of police cars or police officers, but when I go to the hood, you see a cop car on every corner. So just from that standpoint alone, I think the defunding the police or dismantling certain aspects of policing, I think it makes sense, because obviously the folks in Brickell, they're not experiencing a rash of crime, even though there's not a lot of police officers there. So why can't that be mimicked in some of the other parts of town where there's actually an overabundance of police officers and they're actually being violent and they're terrorizing their citizens? If you want to cut down on the violence, let's cut down on the number of police officers that are being hired. I think that's one issue. Two, I mean, in my 33 years of living, I never really heard the term budget cut and police department together since. You don't ever talk about police departments having budget cuts. Maybe every now and then, but that's never like a prevalent theme when you go to these cities. But you hear about that with schools, with public health, things of that nature. They do budget cuts all the time, and they have to pivot and make it work. I think police departments, they have to learn how to make it work on a smaller budget and with not as many police officers. I think they're given a blank check to hire as many officers as possible and equip them with very dangerous, lethal weapons, and they're not really teaching their officers how to actually interact with citizens. So you saw that with the Diamond Loving situation. She, we all know the story. She called the police out to respond to her actually being a victim of a battery. And you see that with the Ty Anders situation, where this officer followed him for 30 minutes before alerting him that he was behind him. These officers are actively looking for situations with these two Black individuals, and it turned into something that they escalated severely just because of the nature of how they police these Black areas. So based on that point, I think we have to do something when it comes to redistributing funds or defunding or dismantling some of these aspects of policing in this country.
And Tifanny, I got to ask you, will you be satisfied with that? Will you be satisfied if they meet you halfway, meaning if the different cities or counties meet you halfway, where they do take a portion of the money and reappropriate that money elsewhere instead of disbanding the police department, disbanding, say, BSO, for instance. Would you accept that? Would you accept meeting them halfway on this?
So when we think about defunding the police and having a police abolitionist framework, that's a step. So it's a step until we get to the next step, because the whole entire goal is to get to zero. And so the goal is to get to a zero police budget. And we know that that's going to be implemented in different steps. So I will be satisfied until we get to the next step, and until eventually we get to a $0 police budget and all money is reallocated into community-led efforts. Because I just want to revisit the topic that somebody brought up earlier when they mentioned somebody breaking into somebody's house. And I think it goes back to conversations that Phil mentioned earlier, and that has been the theme of this entire discussion. When people's needs are not being met, they're going to go to extreme measures to get their needs met. I'm doing a lot of work with Black women in Broward County, and I'm working with one Black woman who recently is a returning citizen, and she told me when she went to jail, she learned how to become a better scammer. She's learning the best tips of the trade, and when she got out, she tried to live an honest life, but she couldn't even find a job. So you know what she said? She said she took those tips and she really implemented them, because she was like, I would do whatever it takes to put food on my table to make sure that my daughter and my family eats. And so when she said that, I felt that, and I felt that with everything in her. And so when you think about that, when people don't have resources, they are going to take extreme measures to get the resources that they need. But when they do have resources, she's like, when I had a job, I didn't even think about scamming. It was the last thing on my mind. And so I think that we have to think about, how do we actually give our community the resources that they need to survive and thrive, because everybody wants to thrive. Everybody wants to have their basic needs met. And so when we think about that, when we talk about defunding the police, is actually doing what the conversation has been going, or that we've been having so far, is just putting it into efforts that actually keep our community safe and give our community the resources that they need to thrive, where people won't even thinking about robbing a house will be the last thing on somebody's mind when they have their needs met. So I think that that's kind of the conversations that we're having, is how do we meet those basic needs? And what was said earlier, police budgets are constantly rising and on the up, but like the thing that communities actually need to thrive and feel safe, those are constantly being slashed and cut. We want those things to stop being slashed. We want the resources to go in the right places, and we won't stop until we get to zero. So yeah, we'll be satisfied with that, but then we'll know that we're going to continue on the next step. And that's the job of an organizer. It's like, how do we got that one win? How do we continue to keep going, continue to give our communities hope and faith to radically think of a world that's free of policing?
Can I just hop in just briefly?
Absolutely, Jess.
I think we have to protect ourselves from this counter narrative that's built upon a false premise, right? So we're talking about home invasions and murders. Have we really done the data around that? I don't think people have really counted the percentage of how often that occurs in a civil society. Over the past 30, 40 years, those types of high, I guess, impact crimes have actually decreased rapidly. I think it's important for these police departments, one, stop spinning this web of fear mongering, because you're doing a disservice to your citizens.
Right.
It makes people distrust you even more. But two, let's look at the data, crunch the numbers, and figure out how many officers does it take for a city that has this amount of crimes that involve victims, and let's start making that apportionment from that level. We just have too many resources that are given to the police for no reason. They're sitting over there with a lion's share of a lot of stuff that they don't need. Yep. And they overuse it, and that's how we get all of this violence and turbulence in our communities. So we're just equipping them to fail. We need to start, running these departments in these cities more efficiently.
And let's get to, I'm sorry, Rodney, I see you shaking your head right there too. So I got to get to, I always love to hear what you guys have to say. When you shake your head, I'm sorry, I got to go to you, Rodney.
Yeah, I agree with Justin. Actually, I have, a lot of those statistical data points. I see the officer worksheets, and throughout their patrols, there's not too many calls to service in those high impact level situations. Our data needs to lead our smart city efforts. And quite honestly, oftentimes police chiefs and sheriffs and whomever, they may come out and say, hey, crime is down. We've reduced it, 50 or 60 or 30, 40%. But I think to the other end of what Justin is saying is like, why don't we reevaluate it based upon that? And I think the sad truth of it is the military industrial complex that spins throughout our national government into our local governments, and that this idea that we aren't safe or secure in our own backyard that allows us to keep implementing more policing. So even though that the narrative is, hey, crime is going down, we have historical lows in homicide and death rates, things are looking up, prosperity is like doing okay, but yet we keep increasing policing. We still keep buying helicopters. Everyone has a take-home cruiser. It just doesn't make sense. And so it goes back to, which I think we'll probably talk about more tonight, is the efforts of police unions to just really hold maybe city elected leaders hostage in how their budget is implemented.
Yep. Oh, that's a real good point. Go ahead, Phil.
And Rodney really alluded to it. As income, as prosperity, as we reach record numbers of success for a small number of people, the ceiling is being blown out for profits and the floor is falling out for millions of people. And that is precisely why we have such a heavy reliance on police, because we live in a society, Jawan, where we do not have haves and have-nots. We have haves because we have have-nots. And the police perform a social function to ensure that property and wealth is protected. It is inherent in the history of police. And so I think within this conversation, which is just, which is righteous, and which I agree with, we must also have a conversation about what role the police fulfill in a sick society, right? They are responsible for ensuring that the millions of people who have no food, who have no access to education, no jobs, are working 5 jobs, delivering from every store and restaurant in the city just to make ends meet, do not wake up one day and say, look, why is it that I live here like this and they are living in a completely, not another side of town, but a completely different Miami, a completely different Tampa, a completely different state of Florida. And so I don't have much sympathy for the police, but what I will say is the police are being forced to perform a function for the wealthy in this country who want the social status of people to remain how it is.
And I know you got to move on, but that's why I say police, the nature of policing in this country, at least when it comes to policing Black people, it's all about surveillance. Surveillance. They're waiting to see, and they're waiting to see if we actually get fed up one day and say, you know what, we don't like this station in our lives that we're living in.
Come on,
rise up. So I think that's the issue. It's the underlying issue, but it's still the issue. I mean, it's an issue that's kind of implicit, but it's still the issue nonetheless.
Well, I look at this as like the civil rights movement. And of course, I wasn't alive. I know I may look a little older, but I wasn't alive then. But I do look at this as a very special movement that is happening in our country and the world right now. So I want to ask all of you, where do we go from here? What do we look like in 4 years? And what is your hope that we look like in 4 years? Because it's interesting. Okay, interesting. We're approaching 57 years that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. marched there in DC on Washington, and with his great I Have a Dream speech. And they were fighting and protesting against some of the same things we are talking about tonight. 57 years later. I don't want to have this same discussion with my grandkids because they're fighting against some of the same things we are going through. Will there be effective change in 4 years? If so, what is your hope that it will look like? And Tiffany, I want to ask you that, and we'll go down the line.
Yes, thank you. So our hope is that we have defund campaigns that are getting wins across the county, so across Broward County. And in 4 years, we know we're going to win. We have people that are really ready to mobilize, that are moving, that are doing the work right now. And we know that the possibilities are endless. And if the people want to continue to get engaged and want to join this current campaign that we have to defund Fort Lauderdale Police Department, you can head to bit.ly, so bit.ly/done dying defund FLPD, and you can figure out how to continue to get involved and join our work and continue this movement. But people are excited. The protests are not dying down. People want to know their next steps. We're constantly getting emailed, direct messages. And so unlike 4 years ago, this energy feels completely different. I think everybody's talking about the energy and how the momentum is being sustained. We are constantly getting requests for people to help support them out with their different protests and making sure that people really have action plans in place, like really have action plans to follow up with people after they protest and to continue this moment and make it into a movement. And I think that we're going to get a lot of more people who are going to commit their lives and commit their energy and their time to these defund campaigns and educating themselves. We have people reading their books. We have people who are really educating themselves like on this
That's
work.
right.
And so I see that energy continuing, and I don't even see where it's like beginning to fade on a local level, because people are really excited to make the energy continue and last for the long haul.
Okay, Philip.
You brought up Dr. King. I want to bring up two things. That was the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. And I think a lot of people forget it was jobs and freedom. When Dr. King was murdered, he was working with Bayard Rustin on a poor people's campaign. When he was killed in Memphis, he was striking with black trash workers. And so I don't know what 4 years is going to look like. I was just joking. I couldn't tell you what 2 weeks ago was going to, I don't know what it's going to look like. The world is moving quickly. But what I do hope is that this movement that talks about race, class, and gender in this country is able to fight for deep structural change in the country, right? So what do I mean? A massive reinvestment in the social safety net that we already have earned. Black people, by virtue of being the foundation of capital in this country, have already earned the right to food, schools, land, healthcare, and an income. I didn't say jobs, and an income, right? And so it is my hope that over the next 4 years, we continue, as Tifanny has said, to build movements locally, statewide, and nationally that continue to demand that we have not just jobs, but that we have the freedom to determine what our lives look like, because currently we do not. And that is what people are fighting against. I'll end it here. We cannot divorce this moment from the last 4 months of people witnessing the coronavirus ravage this entire country, and Black people be a disproportionate part of that. And so we have people who are waking up and realizing all manner of things about this country, most of which that white supremacy and capitalism have created a crucible by which millions of people are going to continue to die unless we do something about it.
Amen. Amen. And for the record, brother, you're right, but it included civil rights at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. No, okay. I'm not taking that away. I just want to mix those two.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure, because, I want folks out there to know that are watching this right now that my thing is that still, with that said, I don't want us having my grandkids going through the same thing that we are going through almost 60 years from now. I just don't want that to happen. I want there to be effective change coming out of basically our discussions and some of the movements that you guys are a part of, that we are talking about. So I just want to make sure that we hammer that home. Okay, Rodney, and then of course we're going to get to you, Justin. Rodney? Hold on just a minute, brother. I think you are muted. There you go.
So there we go. A couple of things. The first thing I'm always going to push is obviously civilian oversight. We have a civilian oversight entity here in the city of Miami, and right now I think it's one of our best options to hold police officers accountable that are involved in misconduct. I appreciate Tifanny, I appreciate Philip on the grassroots doing the community organizing, because that is pushing us to innovative approaches. And while they're pushing us, I'm ensuring things are being held down right now on the main street as well, so that we can hold police officers accountable. I think one of the best things civilian oversight does is something that Justin alluded to too. We have the accountability aspect, but then we also, accumulate so much data in our offices that help drive policy so that we can implement change. Right now, we're trying to do this on the county level. There is no civilian oversight right now for Miami-Dade Police Department, and it's the largest police department in the entire state of Florida. So I think, in us doing that, and we're inches away from implementing something here to making some monumental change. We have a petition going right now on change.org/MDPD oversight. And everyone can get a part of that movement and channel that energy so that we have oversight, so we have something to at least give complaints against police if you're involved in misconduct or bad situations, so that people have a place to go to voice what they're going through, and so that we have that institutional information and knowledge housed. So when the unions or the police department give us anecdotal information about, well, we're pitting cops in this community because that's where all the crime is, or we're doing this because of that, we can say, that's not how this works. We have information to say otherwise, and we're not going to drive information based upon this false narrative that you built. But the next part, I think, peels back some of those layers. I do believe in civilian oversight, obviously, for the time being. But as we push forward, I tell everyone each and every day, listen, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. There should be something that allows policing to change to that goes towards safety. And what we have to do there is peel back the layers. I tell people all the time in the community, listen, you have to figure out where to place your anger so that you have the maximum effect for your goals. Now, if your issue is that you're upset about a police officer who wasn't fired because they did something with improper procedure, then yeah, maybe you should be mad at the police chief and you should seek to hold your grievance with them. But if you're mad at a police officer because they relieved the duty with pay, or if you're mad at a police officer because they don't have to submit to drug tests in order to be hired, or psychological evaluations, or how do police officers get promoted and they have 100 different complaints in the background, well, you need to be upset at your elected leaders for collectively bargaining those contracts with unions. If you're upset that police officers aren't being charged for heinous situations and doing murder, as we've seen in the George Floyd situation, well, you need to be upset at your state attorney for not bringing charges. So these are the areas as well that must change in order for us to get to the next 4 years. We have to hold our elected leaders accountable in Tallahassee for things like the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights that gives just an extended amount of protections to officers involved in misconduct and make it almost impossible for the most well-intentioned police chiefs and sheriff to hold bad apples accountable and weed them out of their policing system. So right now, the immediate reality that we have is that we have to attack those 4 layers that I mentioned: the unions, the collective bargaining situations, and the ability of police chiefs to do their jobs effectively if they choose to hold people accountable. We have to do those things in the next 4 years, and we need to channel our energy into those mechanisms, including civilian oversight, so we can make the substantive change we need in our communities.
And most importantly, folks need to vote. They need to go out and vote and in order to make some of those changes. Okay, Justin, because I want to get to you, Justin, and then all of you. I have a very important question to ask all of you, and it's after we hear from Justin. So Justin, let's hear from you on the next 4 years.
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant. I think Rodney covered a lot of the things that I actively fight for every day. But one aspect I want to add to that is qualified immunity that needs to become non-existent. I think that gives police officers a open mandate that they can be reckless on the job. If you can't sue anybody for their recklessness or their negligence, it means they're going to continue to put forth those actions each and every day and not check them. And the police department is going to allow those actions to be unchecked also. But over the next 4 years and beyond, outside of what Rodney has mentioned, which I echo everybody else, I think, and you mentioned the civil rights movement of the 60s, and Philip talked about King. One of the things that is important when you talk about King is, so his issue was integration. That was the high banner issue. There was a lot of constituent parts to that also. But he said that he feared that he was integrating his people into a burning house. That's because folks who latched on to his mission and vision, they didn't see the big picture, right? They thought, it was integration or bust. And once they got integration, they actually still busted too. I'm thinking that from what I'm seeing over the past 2-3 weeks, we're putting it all on solving this police issue, although that issue needs to be solved, whether it's defunding or disbanding or dismantling. But we got to see beyond that too, because policing is only a tool for neoliberalism, neo-fascism, neoconservative, toxic type of capitalism that continues to keep people at the bottom rungs of society. As long as you have people at the bottom rungs, there's going to be people who are going to be affected by people who take in exorbitant amounts of wealth. They're going to in the wealthy class, they're going to try and pivot and find something new that continues to keep those folks sequestered. So what's going to be next? That's the question that I really want to ask. I don't have the answers because racism and capitalism, it's extremely sophisticated and it's pesky. It's pesky and it's resilient. It can change on the dime and it can evolve under our noses in which we can't even detect it. So we got to stay vigilant in understanding what the issues are from a social standpoint, while also fighting that stuff that's cosmetically apparent. So policing is cosmetically apparent. But how do we solve those social issues on the back end and make sure that there's not another pandemic in which we're losing Black lives at a high rate.
Amen. And the question I wanted to get to all of you about is systemic racism. We touched on it just a little bit, but when we talk about systemic racism, we talk about it impacting us on the economic level, on the health level, on the education level, in the criminal justice system. I want to ask all of you out there, what's needed to end systemic racism? And reparations, I haven't heard any of you talk about that. And I know, Philip, you may have a take on it. But reparations, is that maybe a solution? I want to hear your take on ending systemic racism. And is it possible? And let's hear from you, Tifanny.
Oh, I'm going first now, Phil. So I'm just gonna go right back into my original point. I feel like defunding the police is that effort. You know, I think that you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. A lot of the things that we asked for, we already got. We got de-escalation training. We got body cam training. We got implicit bias training. And all of these things require us putting more taxpayer dollars into policing departments. So what we're systemic racism is to actually defund police departments, is to actually get to zero, right? And then actually pour into the things that keep our community safe. So we're talking about people having access to healthcare. We're talking about people having access to culturally competent mental health professionals, all these things that are under-resourced in our communities because of systemic racism. We want this money to actually be reallocated into community-led, community-identified efforts in order to keep our community safe, in order to end systemic racism. So I think that when people say defund the police, especially when we're talking about this concept, it was actually developed by Black feminists, researchers, lawyers, community organizers, all working in conjunction with each other to say that these are some of the strategies that, you know, have been proven to actually address systemic racism and to address. So that's why we keep on saying defund the police. It's actually a politic, it's a lifestyle, and it's that we want those resources to be allocated into things that actually keep our communities uplifted and end a lot of these systemic racism issues that we have in our country.
All right, Philip.
I hate to be redundant, but we cannot talk about race in this country without talking about the economy. We live in a racial capitalized society. That means with capitalism, a small amount of people exploit the labor of a lot of people here and abroad. That is based and concentrated on white men. And the majority of the people who do the work are Black people, Latino people, women, poor white people in this country. If we are going to undo institutional racism, we are going to have to unravel that relationship in this country between race and class. We're going to have to begin to rebuild a society that isn't based on that, that allows for the people who create, the people who build, the people who actually do the work to grow these companies to have a say in what happens with their labor. Do you understand what I'm saying, Jawan? The people who work at the hotels are going to have to be at the table and deciding what happens with the profits from the sale of those penthouses, and not a small amount of people. I do believe it's possible. I would be a lunatic to involve myself in this work for the better part of my adult life if I didn't believe it's possible. But we must begin to engage in that question around race and capital in this country. And if we are going to do that, I think the work of Tifanny, the work of Dream Defenders, the work of people around the country is a start in that direction, because it is laying out a pivotal question about this country. Where do we put the resources and where are they going? What happens with people's labor? I believe this is a good step towards reparations. Black people are singularly responsible for the entirety of the wealth of the Western world and beyond. And so it is a step in the right direction to begin to take what amounts to the lion's share of city and county budgets away from police departments and putting it into the social services for the people who actually make this city run. It is not the Norman Braymans of the world, the Nitin Motwanis of the world. It is the people who actually go out every single day and work under the sun that make this city move, and they should have a say in what happens with their labor.
Amen. Rodney? You're muted, brother.
They're trying to mute you.
I know. Try to keep you quiet. Go ahead, Rodney.
They can't hold me down. They can't hold me down. I was starting off by saying, listen, I'm a bit more optimistic than Tifanny and Philip in this one, and I know they're the community organizers and they're dreaming for the future. But I really think that our systematic racism in America is really predicated on policing. I think if we can fix this policing problem, then a lot of these other things that are holding down Black and brown bodies will since dissipate. I mean, a lot of what I look at are the intersections of policing to other things, whether it be law or health, the environment, you name it, and everything that we look at that's holding people down from getting those accesses and those mediums has always been rooted in policing. If we look at barriers for people to get affordable housing, one of the things that check people off the list is if they have criminal records or bad information. We disenfranchise people's votes because they've had a run-in with the law, so we've taken away their ability to vote. And if you lived in Biscayne Park this year for whatever reason, they had a whole scheme where they were illegally arresting people to help their crime stats numbers. So there was so many different things throughout our history of life that police have been involved in that disenfranchised us from housing to education. Even I was appalled this year in the state of Florida that a 6-year-old was arrested in a school. I mean, from the school to prison pipeline, from housing issues, from voting issues, from I can't tell you how many doctors I've talked to, Jawan, and nurses who've had clients come into their emergency rooms, beaten to a pulp, and they'll take the excuse of officers saying, oh, he tripped over his own feet, instead of reporting the bad officer. So now you have someone that has been brutally maimed, the doctor can't really treat their client well, and a bad police officer is on the street still. So from the healthcare aspect, from the housing aspect, from the voting aspect, to the educational aspect, policing has in many ways toxified those situations so much that it has bolstered this idea of systemic racism because it keeps people down. And I think if we can solve policing, because policing is in so much of everything, then I think a lot of these things will look to dissipate. And as Martin Luther King has said, everyone wants Black people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but we're not wearing boots. Well, one thing I can say is that, hey, if we solve this policing thing, at least we can go probably purchase some boots for us to do our own work, because it's not about that. It's about coming together, solving this policing issue, and I think the other things we can do on our own will and want.
All right. Oh, very well said. Justin.
I mean, the systemic racism, how do we solve that? I mean, I don't know if we ever get to the point to where we do solve it, not in this country. I think this country was created on systemic racism. I mean, it was based on the delineation of people and demarcating them as races. And all of our laws, all of our codes, our health system, everything of the like has been created from that standpoint. So like Phil said, you're gonna have to do a complete reset. Now I get Rodney's position, and I actually buy that to a certain extent. Policing, in my own estimation, though, is just a tool of the greater problem. If we take the tool away, it's going to make it harder for the system to be able to enforce those severely racist tactics that they have been enforcing for, whenever, I guess policing was created in the early 1800s for slave patrols. But once you take that away, what's next? You have health. I mean, look at COVID. COVID is a perfect example of how pesky racism can be in this country. I don't know if there is a good solution or a good policy that we can lay out, at least in this Facebook Live discussion. It's going to take a lot more energy around the issue to truly understand what systemic racism is. We got to go to the heart of the issue and the genesis of it. I don't think people even ask that question. Why do we have systemic racism in this country? Where is it from? So I think it's really one of those things where we have to change the educational system around really dismantling systemic racism. That's what we need to be studying. What is systemic racism, and what are ways and means to how we can, I guess, reimagine a future where there's an anti-racist paradigm that governs interactions between people here in America. And I think that's the starting point. I'm sorry I couldn't provide you a solution.
Well, I didn't expect you to do that.
Can't do it all.
You can't do it all. You definitely can't do it all. Okay, I want to make sure that I provide some resources for all those that are watching right now. We have some resources here for you that we want to throw up here on the screen. Basically, legal help right here. First of all, Resources for Change. We're going to get to the legal help in a minute. Resources for Change, the NAACP, and we have their website here. Also, Equal Justice Initiative and the Innocence Project. Now, we will have these also online as well at NBC6.com or our Facebook page. We will make sure we keep these up for you to help all of you out there. Also, and I believe we have it. Here it is. The legal help for social activists. I think this is extremely important for all of those that may feel that they were wrongfully arrested, and especially if they were out there protesting. We wanted to make sure that we provided some information for you to go to get that help that you may need. And also, most importantly, the police oversight. You heard Rodney talking about this just moments ago. Here it is, miami-gov.com /CIP right there. So we wanted to make sure that we get that there for you as well. And again, we want to encourage this conversation. I'm going to leave one last comment here to our panelists because we're approaching 50 minutes or so. But I want to hear from you, just final remarks here. And most importantly, I want to ask you, Tifanny, I want to ask you, are you hopeful? And I want to hear all of you and whether or not you're hopeful for the future or not. Tifanny.
Yes, absolutely. I think that our work is spreading this radical hope and radical imagination of what a world could look like free of policing, prisons, and punishment. And I'm radically hopeful that I can see a lot of those things in my lifetime. Because beforehand, 4 years ago, I'll be like, I'm doing this work and, you know, I'm chipping away at stuff. And I think our community's chipping away at stuff, but I'm not sure if I'll see it in my lifetime. And now more than ever, I believe that I will see it on a local level, definitely. And I think that on local levels across the world, people are actually going to do the work to actually end policing or even defund policing to get to the point of a $0 budget and actually have communities that have everything that they need in order to feel safe, that doesn't have anything to do with violence and punishment that policing offers us in this country.
Philip?
I'm extremely hopeful. Everything that Tifanny said 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, the ideas that we're discussing right now were laughed out of the room, or you had to whisper them amongst friends. And now these are things that have become the bellwether, the mainstream demand by a great many people. And so I've seen incredible progress, witnessed it, been a part of it, and been a witness to a great many things in progress. The last thing I'll say is that racism, systemic racism, the economy, the stock market are not things destined by God. These are things developed and made and nurtured by men, and they are not inevitable. And it is that gives me a lot of hope. If they, white men, could build those things, then those things can be destroyed and new things can be born on top of them. And so they are not the things of spirits and gods. They are not princes and principalities. These are real things that we can actually do something about, and we're doing it.
Amen. Rodney. Are you muted again, brother?
No, I'm good.
Okay, there we go, my brother. There we go.
Yeah, we got that together. I'm good. I'm also extremely hopeful. And, you know, as Phil just mentioned, you know, 2 years ago, we tried to institute civilian oversight in the county, and it got vetoed by the mayor. And now the mayor is saying, you know what, this is something we need so people can change. You know, as America grows old, we've seen that it can also grow up. But one thing I would like to remind people of in a larger context, you know, we talked a lot about Martin Luther King tonight. Usually I don't quote him too much because we like to romanticize him. I usually quote Baldwin, but I'll add another part to what he said. You know, when you know, he has his I Have a Dream speech, the most profound thing he said, at least in my opinion, was, you know, we've come to this place to cash a check. And, you know, that check, that proverbial check he was talking about was the promises that America has given the Black and brown people over its course of its history. You know, the promises for equal rights and equality, from emancipation to Brown v. Board 1 and 2, to affirmative action, to the EEOC, you name it. There have been so many different things that America has promised us in the note of a check or a promissory note. We have come too far not to cash that check. We have come too far on the backs of people that have built this country, from Benjamin Banneker to Harriet Tubman, to say now that we've come this far and says, you know what? I toss my hands up. No optimism. It can't be done. I just don't believe that to be the case. More so because we have a check. And I'm not going to give up. And I know the people on this call won't give up until we cash that, because we've earned it. We've earned it by the very nature of us helping build this country. And I think if we turn our backs now and forget about it, we have in so many ways disrespected the memories of all those sacrifices. And I'm not in the place to do that. And I don't think anyone else is. So we keep pressing forward. We remember that we have that check that we're looking to cash, but we also remain innovative. In many ways, Black and brown people have overcome insurmountable odds, and our country has sent people to the moon. So you can't tell me that we can't fix this racism issue within our own borders, because we can. We just have to have the will to do it. And I think together we're going to be able to do it, but we have to lead that effort, and we're doing it now.
All right. Very well said. Justin.
Man, how do I follow up that eloquence?
You bring the debit card.
No, so that's a great question, Jawan, and it's two-pronged for me. So I'm hopeful, just as a matter of course, right? So how I got involved in this work was due to my own brother being a victim of police brutality. I was in law school when it happened. He got pulled over one night and he was beaten severely. It was by two officers that kicked his teeth out of his mouth. He languished in jail for months without bail, and he developed a mental health issue. And when he got out, he succumbed to suicide 4 months later.
Wow.
So just from that standpoint, like, I've been chasing this ghost ever since. That's the reason why I got involved in this work. So I'm hopeful, just by function of me waking up every day and doing this every day of my life, banging my head against the wall, people not listening to me. At times I felt like a dog howling at the moon while nobody cared. I mean, but over the past 2 weeks, people are starting to listen, right? Now we're the smartest people in the room. You know what I'm saying?
That's
and
right.
Before then, it was kind of like, you folks just like, banging your chest and yelling without any substance. But now people are understanding what we've been clamoring about. And that provides hope too. So, I mean, I spoke at a rally a couple of days ago. And my message to the folks that were out there, these are all folks I had never seen at a protest in my life. Because typically it's the typical standard folk who show up, right?
That's right.
But these new faces, I told them, like, look, I'm optimistic because now I got goons on the street, quote unquote. These are new folks who have enlisted themselves in this fight. Yeah. And they seem to be open to our suggestions because we are the subject matter experts. So as long as we have folks like Phil, Tifanny, and Rodney and other folks around the country that are still entrenched in the work, that are still leading, not only by example, but from a philosophical standpoint, letting people know this is why we do what we do. This is why we say
that's right.
I think we can create that multicultural coalition that this country has been needing for decades, for generations. And I think we can get the wins that we need to make sure that this is a country that's livable for all folks and hopefully achieve an anti-racist future.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Justin, and all of our panelists. And I want to make sure that I get to some information from our panelists out there in case you want to help them out in some sort of way or connect with them. So change.org, MDPD oversight. All right, change.org. And I think we're going to try to throw it up on a screen and I don't see it there. So, but that is the petition that Rodney Jacobs was talking about. So Rodney, we're going to try to get that up there. There it is right there. So if you would like to sign that petition, that's the petition right there. And also Philip, if you would like to connect with Philip Agnew, you have the dreamdefenders.org for information and next steps there. And I believe Tifanny, if folks want to connect with you, is there a website?
Yes, you could go to Black Lives Matter Alliance Broward.org. Again, I'll say it, Black Lives Matter Alliance Broward.org. And you can get there as well too. All
right. And Justin, you have an Instagram page where basically you post a lot and you talk about a lot of these, a lot of civil injustices that are happening out there. So how can folks reach you?
Yeah, so follow me at justin.a.more. That's my IG. Follow me at Twitter _JA_more. And I also provided the GoFundMe for the young man I'm representing out in Texas who was terrorized by multiple police officers after they racially profiled him. So we're going to raise money for his legal defense. The district attorney out there is actively and aggressively trying to prosecute this young man for being afraid of the police. And if you saw the video, he explicitly proclaimed his fear, and his grandmother even she corroborated that when she came out and tried to protect their young grandson from being riddled with bullets. So the GoFundMe is there.
Okay.
For the young man, that's that. And also, Philip, he just launched a new initiative last week that I'm a member of. I'm getting these texts every morning.
Black Man Build movement.
Yeah.
Black Man Build. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, Philip, but because I'm running out of time right now. But the Black Man Build movement, I think I'm going to have you on for a separate show to talk about that, my brother. I know you hate these virtual things, but that's just the way it is, my brother. And when you become my friend, that's the way it is.
I'm here.
You got it, my brother. So most importantly, Sister Tifanny, I want to thank you so much for all your work and hard work and everything that you do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Rodney, thank you so much as always. I know you reached out to me. You wanted to make sure that we did something, that we use this platform in order to get out, information for folks so they can be involved in effective change out there. And Philip, you're always there for me whenever I need you. I really appreciate you. And Justin, you my brother, and you're always on it. And seeing what you've done in the community, seeing what you've done on behalf of your brother, that touches me and touches my soul. I appreciate you and your knowledge. And I'm sure we're going to have all you guys on the show once again. But before you go, I think it's important to listen to the words that former President Barack Obama put out. He had this to say about keeping up with the movement and not giving up with that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Make sure that we now follow through, because at some point, attention moves away. At some point, protests start to dwindle in size. And it's very important for us to take the momentum that has been created as a society, as a country, and say, let's use this to finally have an impact.
And that is from former President Barack Obama. And also, I want to make sure that I leave everyone out there with some sort of hope. These are images that we put together before we go. We want to leave you with these images. And most importantly, thank you so much for tuning in to Voices this week. I'm Jawan Strader. Be sure to tune in next week at 7:30 as we continue the conversation, because it's far from over.